Hey guys, it's Counting my review for the rest of the season of Runaways. Yes, I am still watching the show. Similar to many shows I reviewed, I never intentionally meant to get behind on Runaways. It just kind of worked out that way. And of course, the season did in fact wrap up this week, so I figured I might as well get back into it. And I have to say that I'm not that upset that I didn't, that I did get behind on this show. Because while at first the show did initially show a lot of promise, I thought the first 5 episodes were really strong. The second half of episodes here are a mess, and eventually it just turned into something that I really wasn't as into, and I just want to get into right now. So starting off with the 5th episode, as we know at the end of the 5th episode, Alex was in fact kidnapped. He was taken in by the parents to be the new sacrifice, and we knew obviously nothing that detrimental was going to happen to him, like nothing really earth-shattering. He's basically the main character. He's gonna be okay. You know he's gonna get out of this. But damn, I mean, this is a big common theme with these last few episodes. This whole thing is very rushed, and it happens in, his breakout happens in, like, the first, 15 minutes of the 5th episode, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we didn't get at least an episode with him captured. It honestly did piss me off a bit that happened, but I'm glad it happened because the episode was quite boring before then. We had this whole flashback with, Darius and Jeffrey. We find out that Jeffrey was in prison at one point, which, of course, we already knew that, but we realized that he was in prison and that Catherine was actually his lawyer, and that is how the two of them met. But then there was this businessman named Jonah who was waiting for him, and basically, he makes it clear that he's not going to plea any sort of bargain. Jonah says he has a deal for Jeffrey, and he's glad to have Catherine sit in. He wants to buy this, mall in South Central that Jeffrey's uncle left to him, and Jeffrey figures that there's, a reason for the property's value, and Jonah tells him that he just wants to see it reach its fullest potential, and the prisoner figures that if Jonah wants it on the property, he'll need a partner, and, basically, he assures Jonah he can handle it from inside, but Jonah's not interested. And when he returns to Darius, he says he needs a favor from him, and in return will look after his family for life. He wants Darius to say that he shot Osiris instead of him, and basically this is how Jeffrey was able to get out of prison and how he has such an active role in Pride, and it's supposed to feel like this big moment, and it just really doesn't. Again, because Jeffrey's narrative is kind of all over the place. I mean, this was the guy who was, at the beginning of the show, very conflicted, but we don't really see that throughout the rest of the season. It's not really a big narrative here, and again, we'll get to that in a little while, but like I said, this kidnapping of Alex, it only lasts 15 minutes, and I will say, the scene where all the teens break him out and they have that awesome fight, I really did love. I really did love that scene. I think it's one of the best action scenes, of the entire season. I really do love the way it's done with them facing off Darius, because, Darius is the one who kidnapped Alex, and basically, all the teens do break him out. I thought that honestly was a very strong scene, and I really did like where that went, but like I said, this is very much rushed, just like many of the plot lines this season. And like I said, this specific plot, I think, really just kind of defines what the rest of the season ends up being, which is the idea of just doing too much too soon and too little, too fast. I think that's the perfect example of what the season really does do. And what I mean by that is, the end of the season, especially these last 4 or 5 episodes, they try to cram a bunch of things in, but none of it really feels like it needs to happen. It feels like it's only happening because of the fact that they don't really have much of a story to tell. And admittedly, I didn't think it was a bad idea to, flesh out the kids and flesh out the parents before the actual conflict ensues, but this is not the way to do it, especially, a lot of the plot lines in this half of the season, especially when it comes to relation between the kids and the parents. It really is all over the place. The motivations are just really not there. It's really hard to tell where some of this stuff is coming from, and it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And a lot of it, pretty much lasts for like an episode and then just kind of goes away. For example, there's this one arc that happens in episode 7 where Nico suddenly thinks that Alex, has some intel and that he is hiding something from them. And she's giving him all these questions and this would be fine, but before then we had this scene between Nico and Alex where they were talking and all of a sudden they started to kiss, and it seemed like they were hinting at the possibility of Nico and Alex actually becoming a thing. And this is a completely suitable plotline. I'm completely fine with that. There have definitely been hints that these two could possibly be together. I mean, remember when Alex wanted all of them to get back together as friends and get his group back, Nico was the first person on board. Nico was the first person who's like, oh yeah, definitely this is a great idea. I'm definitely interested. So it's not really that surprising that they try to pair these two together. But again, that doesn't last this season. That lasts like 2 episodes at most, and then again, it just kind of goes away. And I don't think it's because of the fact that they didn't have enough plotline. I think it just kind of stems back to the fact that they were just doing way too much. And they're trying to cram all this stuff in, and it just doesn't work at all. I think that definitely is a huge problem with these last few episodes, and like I said, it really does not work here, because like I said, the next episode we have like Nico questioning Alex on how he knew, how he knew Tina's password, and how he knew her mom's password and all that stuff, and he's not talking and not giving her the information that he wants. But again, this quickly does go away. Alex being shady doesn't really make a lot of sense, though. There's really nothing this season that's hinted the fact that Alex knows more than he lets on. And it just kind of feels like it's there because they're running out of plot. They're running out of steam, and they need to cram this in just to stretch out the season, and it just really doesn't work, unfortunately. And this very much applies to the team dynamic, which is just all over the place. And like I said, chemistry is not the problem. I've alluded to this before. The chemistry in the show is fantastic. I think all of the kid actors work very well together. I think that they all have really great pairings, and I think they all really do have their own chemistry. And that's why some of these storylines are somewhat convincing, and to a point do somewhat work, because these actors are very convincing in conveying these specific emotions. When Nico's doubting Alex, you can feel it. It doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of her character, but Lyrica Okano is so great in, delivering this that you really are kind of convinced that, okay, she really doesn't trust Alex here. When Chase makes an irrational decision, like, for example, there's a whole, the whole season, of course, we know that he's really not trusting Victor. And there's a whole episode, the end of episode 7, actually, is him getting into a fight with Victor and just freaking out, and eventually it gets to the point where his mom actually shoots Victor, who we found out actually does have brain cancer. But then in the next episode, even though Chase was so adamant on going after his parents, he for some reason destroys all the evidence they could have that is, that could incriminate them. For some reason, he destroys all of it for no reason. He smashes the laptop, and we don't know why. And again, Greg Sulkin's delivery is very convincing in that regard, but it still doesn't really make a ton of sense, and I don't get why they took it in that direction. None of that made sense there. It didn't go with the plot line at all, and there are a lot of plot lines that happen there, especially, though, when it comes to the romantic pairings, which those are completely all over the place. I mean, I'd say really it's episode 7 when it starts to get very confusing on who likes who, but these last 4 episodes really spend way too much time on who likes who's gonna get together, oh, you should ask this person out, oh, you two have potential, and it wouldn't be a problem if they would have sprinkled it throughout the season, but they just don't. It felt almost as if, again, they didn't have any story to tell, so they're just like, all right, let's just get all the couples together that people want to see together, because the fans are, of the comics are probably going to watch this show, so we want to please them. And it felt a lot more like just fan service. Like, this is stuff people want to see, and not, okay, this actually is, makes sense from a logical story standpoint. It didn't really feel that way. For example, the whole season, it seems like they're billing Carolina and Chase together. In fact, there's a fantastic scene where Carolina is trying, she's just gotten so fed up with her parents, and she's at the point where she's really trying to test out her powers, and Chase doesn't realize that she's able to fly. We don't either. She's about to, we think, commit suicide, but we realize she can actually fly from her powers because she's basically a fairy. She's able to fly from it, and Chase, ends up, they do end up kissing. He ends up stopping her, we thinking they're professing their love for each other. But that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. You would think that they would be pairing these two together, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And if these two ended up together at the end of the season, that would have made perfect sense. But like I said, that's not really what ends up happening. What instead ends up happening is, for some reason, in episode 9, we have this scene where all the characters go to this dance. Chase and Gert, who we could tell that Gert has had feelings for Chase throughout the season, but Chase has never really reciprocated them. All of a sudden, these two start to connect, and they start to have this really great connection, and they end up having sex. Yeah, they end up having sex in episode 9, and it comes right the fuck out of nowhere. I don't know why they went in this direction, and it doesn't make any sense. And again, if they were to sprinkle that, shows some scene where Chase maybe does take a liking in Gert, that's a different story. But they really didn't do that this season. They didn't spend any build-up with them, but that's not as bad as the other romantic pairing this season, which is Nico and Carolina, which, again, I've heard that these two do end up together. I've heard that Carolina ends up becoming a lesbian. I am well aware of that. But again, there's nothing this season that hints at those two being together. There's only one other scene that I could think of that really hints at that. And it's when Gert is talking to Carolina and asking her if her and, if her and Nico have feelings for each other, and Carolina denies it. You could tell that she's not thinking about it. So why all of a sudden are we now pushing for these two to get together? It felt very rushed, and it was not the time to pair them together. The only reason, again, that I think they did that is because it's the end of the season and we need some sort of stakes. And again, not the time to do it. The time to do it's in season 2 or 3 when we know these characters. But honestly, none of these characters really have an arc. They just kind of it's the same plot for like every episode, and there's not really one specific arc with them. There isn't really a character that I can think of that had a consistent arc. I was gonna say Chase did, but then of course, the whole him breaking the laptop happens. Alex certainly doesn't really have an arc going on. His whole arc is just, let's go after our parents, but then, oh, he's a traitor, and then, oh, he's not. Nico doesn't really have an arc this season. You would think her arc would be her possibly trying to figure out what happened to Amy, and we do find out what happened to Amy, but it's not through Nico that ends up happening. That's not really how that works out. Gert and Molly. Okay, Molly, I will say, does have maybe somewhat of an arc. Like, she starts out the season and she's, she gets more advanced with her powers. She does sort of realize how to enhance them a little bit. And there is a point in the season where she ends up running away to her, I believe, grandmother's house and finds out a little bit more about her parents. But again, that was not her underlying arc of the season. The arc of the season, at least it seemed for Molly, is the fact that she has these powers and she's trying to control them. That's what it seemed like. And for Carolina, it was that she was, discovering these powers and she didn't realize that she really had them or what to do with them. That was really their big arc. And those two arcs kind of are screeched to a halt because of these romantic pairings. It completely, it just completely sort of negates any sort of compelling storylines we could have had with these characters, and instead it goes for this teen melodrama that I really didn't need. I didn't need this teen melodrama. If I wanted teen melodrama, I'd watch something like, the OC or Gossip Girl or even Riverdale, because that's what Riverdale is starting to become. I don't look for that in Runaways. Runaways, yes, you can have that, but to a point. There's got to be that line where, okay, here's the plot line, and yes, we will have romantic pairings. But again, I want to know these characters before I can actually think if it's a logical standpoint. And from what I saw, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and I really don't know why they spend so much time on getting these characters together, because again, in the end, it really didn't do much of anything for the show, and it squandered any sort of potential when it does come to these characters who, like I said, I can't really think of one character that really had a conclusive arc throughout the season. But the other big problem with the second half of the season is the villain, which up to this point, you would think the villains are the parents, right? Well, no, that's not necessarily true, because there's also been another character, as you guys know, and that's been that mysterious figure that has been, that's been burning and is severely burnt and is, obviously decaying. I thought we were going to spend an entire season like that it was going to be the victim, that was going to be this man who's decaying, and we're going to find out more about him throughout the season, but that's not what ends up happening. At the end of episode 5, he actually does wake up fully restored. Why? I have no idea, but he's fully restored, and it turns out he is in fact Jonah, and Jonah is basically the head of the Pride. He's responsible for putting them all together, and this would be interesting if we actually gave a shit about this guy, because that's his entire character. Oh, and Caroline is his daughter. That's really it. That is his entire arc throughout the season. There's really nothing going on with him, and his whole motivation makes no sense. Like, there isn't really one. There is not a motivation there. You don't understand who this guy is. He's just a cartoon. He really is. Half of the season's just him spewing out catchphrases and just trying to figure out how to talk to Carolina, and it just isn't interesting. It's really not. And just like the parents this season, you can't figure out if the show wants you to sympathize with him or if they want you to actively root against him. I really couldn't tell where they were trying to go with Jonah. And again, I think it attributes to the fact that, oh, this season's ending, so we need a villain. But you really didn't need to do that. The Pride was a villain enough. The whole show's supposed to be the kids are realizing that their parents are evil and they need to get away from them. And that would have been enough. If you would have just had the parents as the villains, that would have been fine. But there's no consistency within that group, so they brought in Jonah, and it just overcomplicates things even more, because then we get into the whole fact that we find out that Frank actually knew that Leslie cheated on him, but somehow he doesn't now. Why? I don't know. I guess his memories were erased. Again, the show doesn't really dive into that a lot. Then we find out that, like I said, Jonah's actually Carolina's daughter, and he's wanted to tell her for a while now, and he doesn't really know how to do that. And again, they don't really do anything with that plot line until like the very end of the season. We find out that he actually played a pretty active role into Amy's murder, and we don't know why or whatever. There's so many things with him, and all of his, like I said, motivations are just so unclear. You don't know what he's really doing here, and I think they just could have kept him for the second season. It would have been fine if they had done that, and it would have made sense too, because we would have spent a whole season finding out about this guy, getting information on him, and then you could have had him, emerge at the end of the season. The season should have ended, at least for the Pride storyline, it should have ended where episode 5 ends, with Jonah now being fully restored, and then you could have dived deeper into it, and it would have worked, because next season is actually 13 episodes, and this season was only 10, and next season, they have a lot more story to tell there, and they have a lot more room, and it just, again, he does not fit into this season. He's a complete cartoon, and his whole plot line is it's extremely confusing, and especially once you factor the Pride into all of it, why they would even follow this man, besides Jeffrey, who, yes, his story does make sense, that, he decided that he gave him this deal where if you work for me, I'll get you out of jail, then your friend's gonna go to jail. That makes perfect sense. I'm completely fine with that, but there are so many other things that just don't make sense here, and his whole plot line, like I said, is just extremely confusing, as is many of the storylines this season. But with all that said, I've talked enough about all of the confusing plot lines going on this season. Let's get into the finale, because at least that is the one thing I would have given this season. If they could have had a finale that does stick the landing, then I would have been happy, and they don't. This finale, not only does it not make a lot of sense, not only does it have a lot of things that just feel completely out of left field, but it's very boring. I honestly was quite bored by this finale. They make you think in episode 9 there's going to be this amazing standoff between the Runaways. Oh, sorry, can't call them that, because literally Alex wants to call them that in episode 9. They're like, no, that's not who we are. We're not the Runaways. So they're actively not calling themselves that. I don't know why the hell this show's called the Runaways. I understand they're going to run away at some point, but why don't they want to be called the Runaways? I don't understand that, but that's beside the point. It's between, the kids and their parents, and it's supposed to feel like this big thing. It lasts like 50 seconds. It does. It lasts 50 seconds. We see, Jonah comes out, and he has this transformation. He has powers as well. And again, it's supposed to feel like this big moment. A lot of these storylines are supposed to feel like this big moment. The whole thing with Chase destroying his laptop, that's supposed to be destroying the laptop. That's supposed to feel like a big moment. The reveal of Jonah coming back, that's supposed to feel like a big moment. But none of it really feels that way, because again, it doesn't really feel like the story earns any of these big revelations. And Carolina finding out Jonah was her father is something I think they could have kept till season 2. I honestly think they could have done that. They could have revealed it at the end of the season and it would have been perfect. I think they could have waited to do that, but they just didn't. And basically we see at the end of the season, he does take Carolina away. She eventually comes back into the group. The rest of the episode, they're like on the run, really trying to figure out what to do, because obviously their parents now know of their, abilities, and they obviously can't really deal with their parents right now, because their parents are, of course, the Pride, and they now know that their children know, which is the one thing they were trying to keep them from knowing. So obviously this isn't really working out for them either. I did like the scene where Gert said goodbye to Old Lace. I did think that definitely was a very sweet scene, even though Old Lace was extremely underused. Again, Ariela Barr is a fantastic actress, and she did a really good job in conveying the emotion there. I'm glad to see Old Lace is, in fact, back at the end of the episode. But the big revelations we do get in this episode, like I said, just don't really feel that way. They don't feel like big things that go down. Well, there's one that I really do like at the end of the finale. There is definitely something I did really like that I do want to talk about. But most of the, like I said, big things in this episode just feel completely out of left field and just feel like they happen because, oh, it's the finale and we need something big to happen. Because the biggest thing that goes down is, of course, with the parents, who I've already established are extremely confusing and don't really make any sense throughout the whole season. Especially when it comes to this revelation, because obviously all season long, we're trying to figure out what happened to Amy Monroe. Who killed Amy Monroe? How was she killed? Was it suicide? Was it a direct cause of the Pride? What really happened? And it turns out, we find out in this episode that Jonah did in fact kill Amy Monroe, but it wasn't really something that worked out, because they were trying to go after the Wizard and not the Pride, which Wizard is like their rival group. I don't really know. They didn't really establish that well either. But basically, Leslie is known the entire time. For some reason, she's kept it from them. I don't know why she has done this, but she has been in the know all this time. They're ready to kill Leslie, but Leslie's now ready to go after Jonah, which again, I don't understand. Why did why were you all over Jonah throughout the season? Why did you act like Jonah was someone you could trust? I just didn't really understand this. I understand Jonah's the one who established the Pride, but why are they just now, why is Leslie just now, essentially, for lack of a better term, woke? Why is she woke now? Because of the fact that she knew this entire time. If she had not known this entire time, that would have made sense. But she has known the entire time, and she's been completely on board with everything Jonah's done. And it doesn't make any sense. It just feels like they're going after him for plot reasons, and I don't understand it. Victor, like I said, he's now in the hospital because of Janet shooting him, and basically he's ready for Victor to come back, and he's saying, you know, Jonah says how things are going to get interesting. We realize his skin is now decaying again. I don't know why, but his skin is decaying. And the end of the episode, we do have a revelation that I really do like, where Jeffrey and Catherine realize that Alex is not coming home, so they want to find a way to protect themselves, and basically they frame the Runaways for Destiny's death. They say that the Runaways are the ones, you know, are the ones responsible, and this now gives them the chance to basically, for lack of a better term, run away. And now we finally have established the main conflict in the show, and that is really how the season does end. So, like I said, guys, that's really everything that does go down in this finale, and similar to the rest of the season, everything that goes down, it just feels like it happened for plot reasons and not because it actually was a logical direction for the show. There are good scenes in that episode, like, for example, I love the scene where Molly is kind of getting to be a kid, because obviously she's the youngest of the group, and she's basically just had to do what Gert tells her to do, and she's been, you know, so into her power. And I like that scene where she's just able to be a kid. I thought that definitely was a good scene overall. But again, it's a good scene. It's not a great episode, and I think that really is the biggest problem with this season. They just crammed way too much into the last few because of the fact they didn't have any story to tell, and a lot of people have compared this first season to Preacher Season 1, and on paper, it is an apt comparison. But when thinking about the last few episodes of the season, absolutely not. I think it's a really bad comparison because so much more happened in these last few episodes than in Preacher Season 1. One of the reasons I defend Preacher Season 1 is because it kept things simple. It told a simple story. It did have stuff going on. It killed off most of the characters, but it did actually have a consistent story. It had high stakes. The character motivations did in fact make sense. That's not the case with this season. This season was all over the place. There were so many things that never made sense, especially the parents. To be honest with you, as good as their introduction was, I never really felt that attached to these characters. I really didn't. I felt much more attached to the Runaways. The parents, I just didn't really feel that way. And I understand the show wanted to dive deeper into them, but they didn't really do anything of interest with them. They had all these really cool ideas. You know, let's flesh out the parents and the kids. You know, let's make the show basically two different shows in one. That's a really cool idea. There's a lot you can do with that. But the show, again, does not want to take the time to really delve deep into these characters and to make them interesting. They present things like how, oh, Jeffrey was conflicted, or how Frank isn't, you know, there's something wrong with him. He's not in the know. Or the fact that Tina, we could tell, is very ruthless and she will do whatever she can to, you know, stay loyal to the Pride, and that matters to her. But again, other than that, they're like barely scratching the surface. Or how Victor, basically, we realized he was so hard on his son because apparently he thought he was inferior to him, and he wants his son to become better than him, and he's kind of like jealous of him. I mean, again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. The motivations, they just feel very confused, and I never really felt that connected to any of the characters. And again, it's because they spend so much time on this specific plot line that just didn't really make a ton of sense, and it just really didn't work overall. And the same with the teenagers. As much as I do like Alex and Gert and Molly and Nico and Chase, I really do like all of those characters. Carolina, they're all very well fleshed out. Chase, not so much. I still am not really a huge fan of his character. I don't care about all the relationship drama. Their stuff is inherently a lot more interesting. Molly discovering her powers, that interests me. Carolina not realizing her powers, that really does interest me. You know, Nico trying to figure out what happened to her sister. Well, now we do know, it's just Nico doesn't know. That does in fact interest me. All that stuff that's gone down with them this season is interesting stuff. It's just the show didn't know how to stay consistent. It did not know how to stick that landing, and I think it just really overcomplicated things. We now have two romantic pairings that have essentially kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, Gert and Chase, there was nothing. Besides the fact that Gert liked Chase and that she was jealous of Chase and Carolina, there was nothing throughout the season that telegraphed that these two should be together and that they have a chance to actually start something. There was nothing that inferred that this season. The same with Carolina and Nico. There was nothing this season that told me these two are going to end up together. Nothing told me that. They could have maybe hinted at it. But the fact they actually got them together, that's what honestly did piss me off. I think they just did way too much too soon. And it's so much that I don't know if they're going to be able to improve it in season 2. I really don't. I think there's a lot of they need to do. The show is in desperate need of a course correction, and I think the best way to do that is to cut the focus on the parents and focus almost completely on the kids, because that is the glaring error with the show. The parents are not interesting. There's really nothing to them. They want to flesh them out, but they don't want to take the time to give them compelling stories that actually gives us a reason to care. And the last episode of the show, I should not still be wondering, am I supposed to be on their side or not? And the same with Jonah. I don't know why Jonah's here. I think they could have saved him for season 2, but again, they just didn't. And a lot of stuff it overcomplicated things. It got way too overstuffed. And we have 16 main characters on the show. I mean, it's no easy feat. I understand that, but I think that's the problem here. These characters are not interesting, and they should never have been main characters to begin with. We could have still had stuff with the parents, don't get me wrong. We could have had an episode just focusing on the parents. I would have actually appreciated that, and we did technically in episode 2, but the rest of the show, it focused more on the parents than did on the kids, and I think that's the biggest problem with the show overall. It did not know how to stay consistent. It didn't really know what it wanted to be. They were just kind of testing stuff out to see what works, and sometimes that works here, but that really did not work for the show at all, and I do think it very much did tarnish a lot of the good that was in the first half of the season. So the first half of the season, I was feeling pretty good about the show. I really was. I was saying this is one of the better, newer shows to come out. I thought this was on par with The Punisher, and now I think it's one of the more forgettable ones. I think, the ending of the season is basically on par with Iron Fist. It really is. The only difference is that I cared about these characters a lot more than I did with Iron Fist, specifically the teenagers. Iron Fist, there weren't many characters I really cared about besides Colleen and, to an extent, Danny. Those were characters I did care about, and Claire as well. Other than that, there really wasn't anyone that I cared about all that much in that show. Runaways, there were a few characters I cared about. They just didn't really know what to do with them, and it just really didn't work out at all. And like I said, there was a lot of great stuff presented over the first half of the season, and that definitely does help the season overall, but the season just didn't know how to stick the landing because that I just don't really know where we're going to go from here overall. I'm guessing they're going to be on the run. I do like this plot line of them basically now being framed for Destiny's murder and them trying to get out of it. I'm looking forward to seeing really where that does go. But if the show's back to just being focused on the parents and not as much on the kids, it is going to disappoint me. I want to see more of the kids, and I think that really is what they need to be doing. Either way, guys, like I said, Runaways, it's not bad. It just could have been so much more. They could have done a lot less than they did in the season, and it's one of those examples of less is more, really. I think that really is the biggest problem of the season. They didn't understand that whole idea of less is more. When you have a simple story, like, for example, what The Punisher is doing, yes, there are quite a lot of characters on the show, but it is a relatively simple story. It does work for the most part. But when you have so much going on, it's very confusing. It's hard to stay consistent, and not every show can be Game of Thrones. It's that simple. This show wants to be like a Game of Thrones epic level story, and it's just not really there yet, and it just didn't really work out overall. And unfortunately, I'm going to give the first season of Runaways a C+. So over, guys, with the first season of Runaways. The most guys thought of the season overall. Loved your thoughts in it. Like I said, I don't at all hate the season. I think there was a lot of great stuff in this season for sure. It's just they bit off way more than they could chew, and ultimately it just made things way too confusing and way more overcomplicated than I think it really needed to be. But that's it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.